There is an island so strategically important that multiple superpowers have fought over it, spied from it, built secret bases beneath it, and right now, at this very moment, are quietly positioning military assets across its frozen coastline. And most people still think it's just a big chunk of ice with a misleading name: Greenland. The word barely registers on the mental map most of us carry around. But here's what nobody tells you. This remote Arctic island might be the single most consequential piece of land on the planet when it comes to who controls the future of global defense. By the end of this video, you will never look at Greenland the same way again. Let's start with something that will immediately reframe your entire understanding. Pull up almost any world map you've ever used. The kind hanging in classrooms, printed in textbooks, displayed on news channels. Greenland appears enormous, roughly the same size as Africa, or so it seems. But that's a trick of the Mercator projection, a 400-year-old cartographic system that stretches land masses near the poles to absurd proportions. In reality, Greenland covers about 2 million square kilometers. Africa covers 30 million. And yet, despite its true size, Greenland punches so far above its weight geographically and militarily that analysts, generals, and heads of state lose sleep thinking about it. The question isn't why Greenland looks big on a map. The question is why it actually matters. And the answer is wilder than you'd expect. Here's the part people miss entirely. When you look at a globe instead of a flat map, and this distinction is everything, the shortest flight path between North America and Europe doesn't go over the Atlantic Ocean the way most people picture it. It arcs northward, directly over the Arctic, which means it goes directly over Greenland. And it also means that any ballistic missile launched from Russia toward the United States, or from North America toward Eurasia, follows a trajectory that passes through Arctic airspace. Greenland isn't remote. It is, in the most terrifying sense of the phrase, right in the middle of everything. And in a moment, you'll see exactly why that makes it indispensable to any serious defense architecture. If you enjoy these deep dives into maps and hidden geography, consider subscribing. There's a lot more where this came from. Now, let's talk about what's already there, because the military footprint on Greenland is not a recent development. It's a story that goes back over 80 years, to a moment when Denmark, the nation that administers Greenland, was occupied by Nazi Germany in 1940. The United States, not yet officially in the war, struck a deal directly with the Danish ambassador in Washington to occupy Greenland themselves and prevent it from becoming a Nazi staging ground. Think about that. America effectively took administrative control of Danish territory while Denmark's own government was under foreign occupation. And they did it because losing Greenland to the Axis powers would have been catastrophic. Even then, military planners understood that whoever held Greenland held a chokehold on the North Atlantic. That wartime logic never went away. After World War II ended, the United States approached Denmark with an offer to purchase Greenland outright. They offered $100 million. Denmark declined. But what followed was arguably more consequential than any real estate deal: a bilateral defense agreement that gave the United States the right to maintain military installations on Greenlandic soil. The most significant of these was Thule Air Base, built in the early 1950s in the island's far north, just 900 kilometers from the North Pole. For decades, Thule was one of the most secretive and strategically vital air installations on Earth. And here's where it gets weirder. In 1968, a B-52 bomber carrying 4 hydrogen bombs crashed near Thule. The conventional explosives detonated on impact, scattering radioactive plutonium across the sea ice. The United States and Denmark scrambled to recover the debris, but reports suggest that one of the nuclear devices was never fully recovered. Locals and Greenlandic workers involved in the cleanup later developed serious health conditions, and for years the full extent of the incident was classified. This wasn't just an accident. It was a window into how high stakes the military game around Greenland had already become, and how little ordinary people on the island were told about the risks being taken with their land. And that tension between geopolitical necessity and Greenlandic sovereignty is a thread that runs all the way to the present day. Because here's the thing about Greenland that most defense analysts will tell you immediately. Its value isn't just about what's already there, it's about what's coming. The Arctic is warming at nearly 4 times the rate of the rest of the planet. Ice that has covered the region for thousands of years is retreating. And as it does, it's exposing something extraordinary. Entirely new shipping routes, previously inaccessible for most of the year, are opening up. The Northwest Passage through the Canadian Arctic and the Northern Sea Route along Russia's coastline are becoming viable commercial corridors that could dramatically reshape global trade. And Greenland sits at the intersection of all of it. That alone would make it strategically significant. But it gets more consequential. Beneath that melting ice, geological surveys have identified some of the world's largest known reserves of rare earth elements. The minerals that are essential to producing electric vehicles, advanced electronics, missile guidance systems, fighter jet components, and virtually every piece of modern military hardware. China currently controls the processing of roughly 80% of the world's rare earth supply. The United States, Europe, and their allies have been scrambling for years to find alternative sources. Greenland may hold the answer to that scramble. And in a moment, you will understand why that single fact has transformed the island from a Cold War outpost into a 21st century geopolitical obsession. Let's talk about the myth versus reality of Greenland's strategic situation, because there's a comfortable story people tell themselves that goes something like this. Greenland is a cold, sparsely populated autonomous territory with about 56,000 people, administered by Denmark, which is a NATO member, so the alliance already has it covered. Everything is fine. Nothing to see here. That story is dangerously incomplete. Denmark's own military capacity is relatively modest. The Greenlandic coastline stretches over 44,000 kilometers, longer than the entire coastline of the continental United States, and monitoring it requires resources that Denmark has historically struggled to maintain. Meanwhile, Chinese research stations have expanded their presence in the Arctic. Russian submarine activity has increased significantly in Arctic waters, and the infrastructure for detecting, tracking, and responding to threats in this region is thinner than most people realize. The radar systems at Patuxent Space Base, the renamed successor to Thule, are part of the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, one of the most critical detection networks in existence. When defense planners talk about protecting North America from an intercontinental ballistic missile attack, those radars in northern Greenland are among the first lines of response. They are not optional infrastructure, they are foundational, and they represent only part of what makes Greenland non-negotiable in the architecture of Western defense. There's also the submarine dimension, which rarely gets discussed in mainstream coverage. The deep water passages between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, known in NATO planning circles as the Guyuk Gap, are the primary corridor through which Russian submarines would need to pass to reach the open Atlantic in a conflict scenario. Monitoring and controlling that gap has been a cornerstone of NATO's maritime strategy since the Cold War, and Greenland, positioned at the northwestern anchor of that gap, provides surveillance and response capabilities that simply cannot be replicated from anywhere else. Naval analysts describe this as one of the most strategically irreplaceable geographic positions in the Northern Hemisphere. You cannot build a substitute for it. It either matters, or the entire northern flank of NATO's defense becomes porous. And then came the moment that forced this conversation into the open in a way that no policy paper ever could. In 2025, the incoming United States administration made headlines by stating, repeatedly and without diplomatic softening, that acquiring Greenland was a national security priority. The statements were met with shock in Copenhagen, bemusement in some European capitals, and something closer to quiet alarm among defense analysts who understood that the underlying logic, however clumsily expressed, was not wrong. The scramble for Greenland was no longer a theoretical future concern. It was happening in real time, in public, with the world watching. What the episode revealed was something that had been building for decades. The old assumption that Greenland's status as an autonomous Danish territory within NATO was sufficient to meet 21st century security demands was no longer going unquestioned. Some Greenlandic political leaders began openly discussing the possibility of full independence, which would leave the island's defense commitments and its rich resource base as genuinely open questions. Who would fill that vacuum? How quickly? With what intentions? These are not hypothetical exercises. They are active discussions happening in foreign ministries and defense ministries across multiple continents right now. Here is what this means for the broader global picture, and why it should matter to anyone who cares about where power flows in the coming decades. The Arctic is becoming an arena of great power competition at a speed that was almost unimaginable 20 years ago. The melting ice is not just opening shipping routes. It is dissolving a buffer zone that geography had provided for centuries. Greenland is not on the edge of that arena. It is the center of it. Whoever controls, influences, or partners most closely with Greenland in the decades ahead will hold advantages in surveillance, early warning, resource access, and maritime control that their rivals cannot easily offset. That is why Russia has been rebuilding Arctic military bases shuttered since the Soviet era. That is why China has lobbied for observer status at the Arctic Council and funded research infrastructure throughout the region. That is why the United States has poured billions into upgrading Arctic capabilities. They all understand something that flat maps have hidden from most of the public for generations. Greenland is not remote. It is central. It is not peripheral. It is the pivot. And as the planet warms, as the ice retreats, as the great powers reposition for a competition that will define the next century, this island, home to some of the most extraordinary landscapes on Earth, and to a people with their own complex, evolving relationship with the outside world, finds itself at the center of a story far larger than anyone invited it to join. The question now is not whether Greenland matters. The question is who will shape what happens there, and on whose terms. If you made it this far, you already know more about the Arctic's real strategic geography than most people will ever learn. Drop a comment below. Would you ever live in Greenland? Let's see where people land on that one. If this video shifted how you think about maps, power, and the places the world overlooks, hit subscribe and give this a like. And check the description for links to more content like this. The map you think you know is almost never the full story.